This episode of The Construction Record is brought to you by the Greater Toronto Sewer and Water Main Contractors Association. Clean water, our goal, our future.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 80 of the Construction Record podcast. This is Vince Versace, National Managing Editor of the Daily Commercial News and Journal of Commerce, joining you today. And with me is...
Well, Russell Hixson, staff writer at the Journal of Commerce.
And Warren Frey, digital media editor at the Journal of Commerce.
Well, our dear listeners and readers, the readers that bother to listen to us, we are coming to you from three different locations. Russ, Warren, and I recording this podcast because for the last couple of weeks, our company decided to mobilize, and we've all been working from home the last week and a half to 2 weeks, bringing to you all the news that we can as this pandemic kind of finally gripped itself around North America, and in particular Canada.
You can barely keep up with it. There's so much.
I know, there's a ton.
I know, it's been amazing. Like, I keep thinking we managed to cover as much as we've been covering while dealing with working from home on a full-time basis, right? Like, and I don't think we missed a step. You know what I mean? Whether it's if we had been in the office versus being from home, like, it doesn't feel like it from my end, but I don't know how you guys felt about it.
It feels like when I'm at a conference and I just stare right ahead and write things. That's basically what it is, except the conference is my couch.
Right.
Well, I think it's been made a little bit easier because the industry, especially in BC and Alberta, has done a really good job of trying to compile as much information as quickly as possible. So, I mean, it hasn't been as hard to find information about a lot of things. It's just there's so much coming out. To write it quick enough before it changes is kind of a task in itself.
That's probably been our biggest challenge. You're right. To write it quick enough before it changes, because it feels like both governments and a lot of the industry associations and people we deal with are trying to get their legs under themselves, right?
Well, I mean, I was writing a story in BC. There was an issue with they wanted clarification on mass gatherings. And by the time I got all the comments from everybody and wrote the story up, that question had been answered and dealt with.
Yeah, right. And I think we kind of, it's kind of been interesting. Like, for us here, being based out of Markham and in the East, with some of the stakeholders we've been dealing with, some of them were surprised we mobilized so early, our company, to kind of get everybody home and working from home, whether it was in Burnaby or Markham or our remote sites. And so we've had a chance to kind of get our legs underneath us as far as work process and technology. And now to see some of them, now these are the people that aren't our work sites, right? And that's kind of part of our bigger discussion. But, you know, they've been asking, well, how's it going? How are you managing that? How are you working your phones? And to that point, maybe because we're in the news industry too, to your point, Warren, like, we're used to having to remote from very tight spaces, tight windows.
Some back room at a conference or whatever. Like, whenever we do, just to pull back the curtain, whenever we do the P3 conference in Toronto, we've got some back room that we're writing 90% of the time and then going back out and getting, so it's really not that different other than the going back out part. There is cognitive dissonance because we're writing like crazy. Then you look outside your window and literally nothing is happening outside. So you're like, what's happening that I'm writing about here?
So true. It's like, and I know, like, you know, we've all from papers before we joined the JOC and the DCN. I have memories of sitting in my car typing and writing. You know what I mean? Or calling, or way back in the day, to date myself, kind of actually calling in a story from a phone booth.
That is
you know what I mean? Because I couldn't get back to the
prehistoric
newsroom.
Stuff, man.
Prehistoric stuff. I know, Russ. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Had to put down the stone chisel and tablets.
I've written many a story sitting on the floor of a courtroom.
Yeah, right. And it's like, from that to, well, we have all these modern tools. Like, look, we're recording a podcast from 3 different homes. Spanning Canada right now, live, right?
Yeah.
Like, how rough is it compared to the way it was before? You know? But I think that leads us to the first question, too. Like, we've been covering a lot, as Warren and Russ were saying, and our team here at the DCN, too. And it seems like the common themes that the industry is trying to grapple with as they deal with government and themselves. The common question is, how essential is construction right now during a pandemic? Right? Like,
that depends on who you're asking, really.
Exactly. Right? And who you're asking, what do they believe in? Like, it kind of feels like a bit of class warfare, demographic warfare too, right? Based on some of the comments we're getting and some of the feedback we're getting from the industry.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, it's like a two-pronged thing. It's like you have a health crisis, and you want to keep people safe, and at the same time, you have an economic crisis that the industry is seeing looming over them, and people are just caught in the middle of those two things, and they're just kind of weighing and stressing. How do we deal with these two kind of parallel crises at the same time?
Well, that is the thing. How do you deal with it, right?
And there's no easy answer to it either.
No, like at the outset, and I'm sure we're going to hear from this podcast after it gets released. You know what I mean? Some people are going to totally disagree or agree or think we're all nuts or just think I'm nuts. Who knows, right?
Yeah.
But at the outset, I kept thinking when this sort of started, it's like, well, critical construction should still remain open.
Right.
If people are building anything important as far as a long-term healthcare facility, a hospital, major highway, you know what I mean, a major entry point to a border, like maybe that stuff still keeps going, right? But I'm sorry, a 3-story walk-up, whether it's in the outskirts of Burnaby or the outskirts of Markham, you know what I mean?
Well, I have that quote from Mike McKenna in front of me, who is in charge of the BC Construction Safety Alliance, and he literally said, construction is going to have to make some decisions about what is essential or not. Is a hospital is maybe essential, and he said, and I quote, I can't think of an instance where finishing a mall or a 3-story walk-up is essential, end quote. That's what he said.
On the other hand, I talked to Mick Smith from Ocean View Mechanical. They're in Victoria, and they are putting together they're plumbers, so they put together their own wash stations. And what they do is they're building condos, but they're having it so that there's only one person in a suite at any given time. So and the way he said is like, listen, I want people to be able to keep working and keep paying the bills, but I also don't want to put them at risk. And this seemed like, okay, there's slow progress, but at least it's something, and at least it kind of answers most of these questions and keeps them safe. So there are some ways in various circumstances to do this.
That's true. And wasn't it, you had the story with that developer out there in BC? Was it Algra Brothers?
Yeah.
Right. Yes. They went the opposite route. They said, put the tools down. This is more important than us building this thing. Specifically, they were doing a thing in downtown Chilliwack, but it could have been anything. They said we can't maintain social distance. They also pointed out people who live in Hope and drive into Vancouver, or take your Toronto equivalent, if they're carpooling, that's not safe. So and how else do they get out there? So it's like I said, it's not an easy answer.
Well, that's it's like the province. That's kind of a perfect example of what the province is saying, which is, here are our guidelines. If you determine that you cannot meet these guidelines to keep workers safe, then don't have people on the site. And I guess that they look at the guidelines and they're like, I don't think that we can meet these and keep our workers safe.
Right. Well, we just had the premier today here in Ontario, Premier Doug Ford. Like last week, we were reporting on it. Construction was deemed essential on the essential list, and that really put a lot of fire into the debate here. But just today, and we had Don Wall covering it, there was an update. He's updating that essential list, and he was asked specifically about construction today, and because we've just over the last couple of days, we've had 3 different sites here in Ontario shut down temporarily because of scares, because of COVID, because somebody tested positive on the site. They didn't contract it necessarily from the site, but they've had to shut down the sites, disinfect everything, and shut down for 2 weeks. Right. So the question got put to Doug Ford today, and in that press conference, he's reporting if the sites aren't safe, we have hundreds of inspectors around the province going into every site possible. If they're not safe, they're going to be shut down. It's as simple as that.
Right.
But then he says, on the other side, we also have to keep in mind, you hit one trigger, it affects other triggers. There's thousands and thousands of people waiting to get into their homes. I got a call from a couple the other day. They have no place to live because they sold their house and they didn't realize what was going to happen. Their new house isn't ready yet. It's weeks away. Like, I mean, okay. I got to personally, like, if people are in a position to buy a new house and they've sold a house, like, are they really destitute? You know what I mean?
Right.
Residential construction keep working, you know what I mean, for them.
Yeah.
Right.
How much of a hardship is that, right?
Well, I know, and not trying to, it's hard to cast that. That's what I'm struggling with. I don't want to cast that wide judgment, but like, considering you have people who can't afford any type of house anytime.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
All right. So it's like, okay, well, that's understandable, but I don't know. Like, what will it take, I guess, is the question. Can these sites really stay safe?
Well, like in BC, you have like specific concerns about like, and Alberta as well, the work camps. I mean, I don't know if there's something equivalent in Ontario to that, but that's like a very specific kind of construction environment that
Right.
a lot of people. I was reading about a city council meeting in Fort St. John today, where Site C is, and the mayor of Fort St. John and some of the councilors were like, if there's an outbreak at the camp and they overwhelm our hospitals, like people in this town are going to suffer. Like it's going to be bad. It's going to overwhelm our healthcare system. We don't know if we can do that, and so they're really concerned. But then that's different than a guy doing, plumbing work at by himself at a single family home. I mean, that those two work sites are completely different in terms of risk, right?
Right. No, completely different. Yeah, like those work camps. And we got comments from people that were in those camps.
Yeah.
Like if it's one thing, like I was kind of hinting at don't want to call it class warfare or demographic warfare, but the divide is pretty clear. We've been seeing both ends of the country.
Right.
You have your employer and the employee representative groups and associations, all of them pretty much lobbying, construction should stay open, right? And then on the other hand, you got your labor groups and labor representatives going, this is nuts, this is crazy.
Yeah.
Right. But through the comments we've been receiving on the website, I do see a little bit of a divide occasionally within that labor bracket. And some of them, we got to take these comments at face value, the names that people provide in the emails, like to try to verify them, right? But there was one guy, a comment I approved today. The guy he wrote this, I'm paraphrasing it because I don't have it in front of me, but he's like, I need job sites to stay open. I'm a single dad that has to pay, alimony, and I got to put food on the table. Right, and child support. These shut down, as he put it. He's like, I've become a deadbeat dad.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm like, that's kind of some food for thought for some of these guys. This is their lifeline, right? Like, what happens, and do the government programs help somebody like him if he gets, shut down, right, or loses his job? But other guys, go ahead. Russ.
That was a concern that I was talking to, the Calgary Association, and their employers. They think it's great that the government is announcing these programs to help provide for employees that they have to maybe lay off, but in terms of how their members apply or even qualify, they have no idea, and they're very confused. And that's what they're saying, because construction work is a lot different than other kinds of work, because you have to show a certain amount of detriment to your business, but in construction, you may not see that massive decline in profit for months because of the way the cycle works in construction. And so they're not even sure if they can qualify for some of this stuff. And the government's announcing things, but they're still trying to figure out how it applies to them.
Right. And it's that thing, like there isn't it's early days in this, and it looks like we're going to be stuck with it for a while, right? So unfortunately, I can see the frustration in the industry, like trying to get the right answers. But I wonder what the tipping point is, for some of these sites and construction in general. How many sites will it take? Will it take a site being the ground zero for like a spread amongst a crew or a team, right?
Yeah.
For them to eventually shut it down. Like, not sure what it is.
Just in the opposite direction, I've been thinking about this a lot over the last few days. Like, we're in the okay, fine, I guess so stage of human behavior. A month from now, are we still in that stage, and how does that reflect on the industry and from any angle of it, right? When a guy's bills come up, or when an owner isn't making the money, and then they're like, okay, fine, we're used to doing this now, but I have to make money. There's going to be a reaction at some point.
That's right. And that's why I wonder, like here in Ontario, we're hearing it a bit. It's been posed by some of the folks that have reached out to us with comments on the website. It was posed by the new Liberal leader, Stephen Del Duca, here in Ontario. This idea of, why not? And it's not just unique to this jurisdiction. This idea of like, just shut down construction for the next 2 weeks and get the sites ready. You know what I mean? Make the sites ready. Make sure there's running water. Make sure the porta potties are being serviced. Make sure there's, enough sanitizer and running. You know what I mean? Like, make sure everything is there to help them be safe on the site.
Right.
And at first I thought, it didn't. But now, as the momentum has been gaining a bit in the discussion, I keep thinking maybe that is a good idea. For 2 weeks, just shut everybody down. You know what I mean? To make sure the site, and maybe find that common ground, that middle ground between owner and labor right now. Maybe that's a solution. because what's 2 weeks on a project? Quite frankly, we all know about it. Most projects are always running late anyways, right?
Right. Well, the industry they're always saying, we're adaptive, we can adjust to all sorts of environments and restrictions and different things. And like you said, maybe if we give 2 weeks, they can adapt quicker. And to be fair, some sites have a lot of sites have definitely adapted. And I see on Twitter all the time people posting, here's how we're adapting. We're setting out cones to make sure people know exactly what 6 feet is. Here's the wash station that we set up. But like you said, maybe if people had a little bit more time to dig into that, workers might feel better.
Yeah, just the source out, you know what I mean, the supply chain, because one of the big problems we keep hearing is about the servicing of the porta potties on site. You know what I mean? Has become worse now during the pandemic, because some folks are either out of business, can't keep up with demand. Like, I think categorically the three of us can say, because obviously we cover this industry and we have a passion for it, this industry can adjust. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
they're clever. There's very clever people that they have to solve all sorts of very complex problems. And, maybe porta potties, that's a problem that someone can solve, right?
Yeah.
They're also more used to boom and bust than anybody else.
True.
Really. I can point to another industry that's as used to it as this one, right? There's a couple, but there's not that many.
Not that many. That actually kind of always bounce back. You know what I mean? Because there's always building happening, right? And I just got to think that there has to be a happier solution. Like, I would hate to think, like, not all avenues were explored to maintain these sites, and if they need to stay open, but to maintain them safely, like, maybe give that lead time. Don't make the government just say everything has to stay closed now. Maybe there was a solution, whether it's a residential site or an ICI site, right?
Well, there's also a huge difference between like a really large GC and a small company with 10 to 15 guys who maybe doesn't have the resources to solve some of these problems so quickly. And it's been really cool to see Calgary, where they're doing conference calls every day. So some of those larger companies, or maybe even the association, these different people who have much more resources can help some of the smaller organizations that maybe don't have those resources. It's not like they're wanting to put workers at risk, but it's all happening so fast, and they just don't have the manpower or the ability to maybe change quick enough. They just need help.
Yeah. And I always wonder too, like, because we see it through a silo. We're focused on construction, right? And that's our focus. Government isn't just dealing with one industry, right? So you can imagine, most likely there's other industry. Maybe if we talk to other B2B publications, they tell us what they're looking at.
I'm glad I don't work for a health publication right now. I'm just putting that out there.
Could you imagine? It's an interesting time. Like what was one of the comments that struck me here is one guy, a gentleman by the name of John Kelly had commented on a DCN story, and he said he would be personally stopping for at least a 14-day period. He's like, as commented by Doug Ford, some priority projects need completion. Hospitals takes these weeks to ensure I am healthy and give companies the opportunity to bring all sites up to the top level of hygiene. And he's a reinforcing iron worker. Right. And I'm not picking and choosing his comment just because it reinforces my idea, but there were some thoughtful comments like that from some folks. Right.
Right.
Like, other guys are like, as a construction worker, it's hard to work at this condition with COVID-19 spreading around us mentally and physically. I don't feel it's stable enough to continue to proceed. We need a temporary shutdown. So I think that's the other worry too. I know we felt it. I was talking to staff, and Warren, you and I had to make a big decision. Like, I'm
totally, yeah.
You know what I mean? This podcast, as you guys knew for months, I was saying, well, we would say we're the supporting podcast of ConExpo, one of the supporting podcasts of ConExpo. 48 hours before we had to go down to Vegas, we pulled the plug. We didn't go down to ConExpo, right? But it's still the right decision. Weeks later, I feel like it was.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, what were we going to do? Like, somebody else had returned from another Vegas conference with the virus. So, I mean.
Yeah. As soon as we had heard that, like, one had come back to Toronto, another one had gone back to Washington State. They both had been in Nevada just weeks before we were to head down. And I remember when I was talking the decision out with Warren, and like the leadership at our company left it up to us. And it was more, I kept on thinking, but besides the fact of worrying and bringing it back home to our families and friends, right? Besides just that, the thought of doing that was stressful, right? like I kept thinking, what's going to happen 3 days after we get back from Con Expo? After Warren and I have been careful, haven't didn't shake a lot of hands, bathe ourselves in sanitizer, right? We come back and I start feeling sniffles. I start feeling soreness in my throat. I start feeling like I'm running warm, like just that mental anguish that would be like.
Well,
And
times that by 240,000 people in
Yeah.
BC, which is how many people go to work in construction, right?
Right.
And just how fast everything was changing. I was planning to go on vacation, like from Vegas to California, and we had to cut it off. And they just had to, and so that tells you in about 3 or 4 days, the space of that conference's time, we had to decide not to do that as well. So that's how quickly events were progressing.
Yeah, and it just snowballed.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like from there, and then when I think about our company's decision, it came because then it was all logistical planning time on our end. After that, we had to mobilize. So compare that to these guys on these sites, right?
Mm-hmm.
Starting to worry, you know what I mean? Starting to hear stories. They share tools. We had somebody commented it earlier today. They were watching a work site in Kingston. And they're like, I'm watching these folks put up these because they're working on a roof and putting up walls. Mm-hmm. They're not standing 6 feet apart. And I'm going, well, it's hard for them to put up walls standing 6 feet apart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. So like, are those guys worried? Are they being tactical when they do that? Right. So, like, we got to help out the workers as much as the owners need the help too, because they need to remain viable. So the industry remains viable. I get that. Right. But, it's a dangerous industry at the best of times.
Well, it's also an older person's game, unfortunately, right now, as they're trying to recruit more younger tradespeople. A lot of these guys on job sites, and girls as well, women as well, they're older. And, from what the information we're getting from, the WHO and different people, like this virus affects older people generally in a more severe way, or it can. So, that's stressful for some people who maybe have underlying health conditions. They're older and they're working, they have to go work on a job site.
Exactly. We have another comment here. A gentleman by the name of Jason said, shouldn't everyone have a clean bathroom all year round and not just through the state of emergency?
Fair.
A clean bathroom isn't going to stop the spread. We travel to work, we need gas, we come home to our families after being at work and being exposed to everything. We are the biggest spread right now, and it won't stop until you halt everything.
Wow.
That guy's coming in pretty heavy, right? If we take him at face value that he's a worker from the industry, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we've had guys counter these kind of comments on our website, going, it's the young guys in the industry that don't know how to work. Why are you worried? Right?
Yeah.
The sites are never clean anyways. Why are you complaining now? Well, maybe because there's a pandemic going on. That's why. Is my answer, right?
Waves hand around world.
Yeah, this is unprecedented times, as was it Chris Gardner said to one of you guys in a story? Like, it's unprecedented.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what's happening right now. So WorkSafe BC out there on your end, they've started some of their site inspections, right? Around
BC Building Trades kind of lit a fire under them a bit before that happened, but they did do it, yes.
Yeah,
and they're probably planning to as well anyway. But
and I would guess that's probably just talking to stakeholders, making sure, look, this is what you need on a site, considering what's happening, right? They're probably not out there just hammering folks left, right, and center right now,
Right.
And I bring that up, probably that's the measure of kind of understanding maybe the industry needs right now. It's like, look, this is all foreign territory for everybody, as they try to figure out how to deal with this if they're going to stay open and running.
Yeah.
With Alberta and the oil patch, we were talking about the work camps, right, Russ? That was Site C was the first one that started to kind of pare down a little bit.
I believe it was Kitimat. I believe Kitimat LNG and Canada LNG were the first two. They're all of them. I mean, Site C now as well. Pretty soon after, they all started shrinking their workforces, and they're just essentially saying, there's certain maintenance work and certain small things that have to be done, and anybody else that doesn't need to be here, hundreds and hundreds of people they're sending home. But there's still people, at the work camps doing, various activities because they're still wanting to meet their milestone goals, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I know Alberta has a unique, my understanding is there's certain work that, tens of thousands of workers seasonally kind of go over and do maintenance and turnover to different things, and they're poised to go over there. And Alberta and BC, I believe, have both issued specific guidelines for industrial sites. They call them industrial sites, but I mean, they mean that's talking about these work camps. I'm sure there's other examples of different industries, but they're talking about these work camps.
Right.
And it's a unique situation because you have people flying in and flying out. So you have a lot of this travel happening, and then you have people living in these work camps, and so they're giving guidelines of how to maintain safety at these camps. But also you have the concerns from I've been reading about and trying to do some research into the towns that are being affected because like with Site C, that's in a town that's in Fort St. John, and there's people who live there, and what happens at the work camps and what they decide impacts the residents there.
And that's what it is. It's kind of like that ripple effect, right? Like what some of these guys have talked about, how they drive in and drive out. They help support local economies as well.
Yeah.
Let alone their work through those sites. And I guess that's always kind of the bigger discussion too, right? Like shut everything down. That domino effect can be just crushing to the local economies.
Well, I think the pressure is really acute in Alberta right now because, with oil, the oil prices have just absolutely plummeted.
Yeah. The barrel is worth more than the oil.
Literally.
And so I think the Alberta industry especially is wanting to try and maintain their sites and generating that income because they're facing one of the more acute economic crises in Canada right now, I'd say. Calgary already has 20%, 21% vacancy in their office towers. I mean, they were forecasted for moderate growth in the next decade, and all that's out the window now. That was before this. So they were already in, a tight spot, kind of very moderate recovery before this. So going forward, it's going to be even more difficult. I mean, I was talking the other day with, the Calgary Association, and they said, yeah, we have a member right now. All their work's dried up. They have zero revenue coming in right now, and they need help immediately or they're done. So I mean, they're in a very, very tight spot, and they're trying as hard as they can to keep workers at sites, and they're trying to keep them safe. And I see the struggle, right?
Yeah. Well, is it what you were just saying? And I reminded me of this comment. I just called it up. It was in the Alberta story. It's in our comment section.
Yeah.
We had an Alberta story about Alberta construction groups urge province to keep sites open.
Yeah.
And one of the commentators said, if you guys feel that way, why not ask your employer for a leave? Don't screw everybody else out of a job and force so many people into EI because that's how you feel. If you feel like you don't want to be working through this whole thing, talk to your employer and work it out with them. Simple as that. It's instead of making this blanket decision because the stress is so hard there economically, right? Is that the solution? Just leaving it in everybody's personal hands,
Right.
People need to keep working, especially with Alberta. That's, an industry that, my God, even in the best of times right now was in transition before all this happened. Right. So interesting, eh?
Well, yeah, the province just they came up with a funding deal with TC Energy Corp for the Keystone XL pipeline. And that's just kind of like a little glimmer of hope, I think, for a lot of people in Alberta, especially Calgary, that hopefully, more projects like that get approved. And, there are hopefully more jobs on the horizon for them, right?
Right. Well, all I know is we're going to stay on top of everything. Like I look at our storyboard between both teams, we're full. You know what I mean? It's incredible, like what you guys are working on, what the team on the DCN side is working on, and we just got to remember, like I keep reminding myself, like there's probably are just normal construction stories that we should be covering.
Probably. I'm really surprised when one pops up now. I'm like, oh, that doesn't have the COVID-19 border on it. Wow, that's weird.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So I guess we can tell our listeners and our readers that we will not become just strictly pandemic all the time.
Yeah, well, I hope not.
Serious problems. Pandemic news service.
Yeah, exactly. Like hopefully that. But we'll just keep pushing forward. With that, I don't have anything else to add, guys. How about you?
I only got one other thing. I interviewed a UBC professor a couple days ago and put the story up today, which is yesterday for listeners. He talks about what's going to happen in the city post-pandemic, and he had some interesting things to say, like perhaps this is the final nail in the coffin from not working from home, which was already happening to begin with. Like, and how in terms of urban design, maybe that means people are closer to where they work or live, or when you're designing a home, maybe it's actually designed with a room specifically designed for work. So he goes into very detail in the article, but I just found it really interesting that somebody's thinking about what happens past this and how does this change things from a construction and urban planning perspective.
Yeah, that is great. And actually, I have a freelancer here in Toronto, because the Toronto Urban Land Institute was kind of having a similar discussion like that, Warren. So that's why Don Proctor is going to be covering it for us. And it was looking at, will this influence future architectural design and engineering design, right? It's kind of the same idea, like as it concerns density in a city like Toronto. It's being Toronto specific, but you know what I mean? Interesting, though. Like, you wonder if it is the case, right?
Look at the $1 billion conference center built for the Olympics here. It's now a hospital. So are you going to need $1 billion hospitals? Maybe $1 billion conference centers, maybe not in the future.
Right.
I guess the last thing I'd add is, I think from the people that I've been talking to, it's like a lot of squabbles and rivalries and competitions have been put aside. And, a lot of people in the industry are coming together, similar to an Alberta post floods. You saw that happen. And this, on a much larger scale, I think we're going to see, hopefully the good thing that's going to come out of this is, a lot of people in the industry are going to come together collectively to solve some of these problems. And it'll just increase kind of the collaborative, network that we have in a lot of these provinces. So, hopefully we're already seeing that, and hopefully that continues and grows.
Well, that's a good point, Russ. It is that we're seeing it in kind of the general media, general news, like we have to get through this because the worst of days still isn't here yet. That's the scary part, right?
Yeah.
And
we're not even in the United States. So, it's really
exactly, bad. Which is just bad. And those are still early days there. It's going to require everybody coming together. You know what I mean? Like, I get the business side of things, and I know we cover that, but at some point, some sacrifices and understanding is going to need to be made for the greater good. I'm not going to pontificate all about that. Nobody's coming here to listen to that. But, either way, we'll be covering it, whatever happens. So with that, I don't know. All I got to say is stay safe and sanitize on. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Right. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Hashtag stay home.
Yeah, exactly. Stay home and be good. Thanks for listening, everybody. And thanks a lot, guys. Good discussion.
This episode of The Construction Record is brought to you by the Ontario Sewer and Water Main Construction Association. Clean water is everybody's business.